It's 11:35 at the Big 550 KTRS. A terrific friend of the show and the station is joining us now. He is Kurt Stange of the Stange Law Firm, and we always call on him when we see these stories about divorce and that area of family law. So, Kurt, thank you so much for making time for us this morning. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking me to come on.
There was an article that Jill and I both saw about tying the knot later in life, and here is why you need a prenup. And you obviously are always obvious. You are so far ahead of us in terms of what we hear in the media. This is not a surprise to you, this kind of direction, is it?
No, absolutely not. Prenuptial agreements can really simplify divorce for parties for sure.
And when it comes to the late in life marriages, how should those be approached differently, or should they?
Well, I think that they probably should. I mean, usually when you get married later in life, you've got more assets accumulated. At least that's the hope. And then you've got kids coming into the marriage. I mean, that's not always the case, but it's the case for a lot of parties. So certainly when you enter into a later in your life marriage, which, you know, historically second and third marriages, I mean, the chances of divorce just increase exponentially. So having a prenuptial agreement that preserves those assets in case that second or third marriage doesn't work out could definitely be a wise thing. It can help ensure that the kids of the prior marriages, then they're still going to have some assets that they hopefully are able to inherit someday.
Yeah, now that I've been on Earth for a long time here, unfortunately, I've seen this play out way too many times where one spouse or the other said, well, they'll take care of it. Don't worry when I'm gone. And or if things, we've already talked about it, but it turns out conversations don't really count when things go awry and things get forgotten. So these kind of agreements are really helpful. One of the most interesting things in this article to me was that the rate for divorce for millennials is slightly lower than previous generations of in the same age range. And they are more likely to have prenup agreements than previous generations. And I think previously maybe people were a little more superstitious, like, well, am I tempting fate by talking about this ahead of time, presuming our marriage isn't going to get together? Are you experiencing that in our community as well?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, you see divorce rates dropping as a whole. A lot of millennials have seen their parents get divorced, and they've lived through it and seen the impact of it. So obviously they're not looking for the same thing in their life. But a prenuptial agreement can be a fantastic thing that takes a lot of issues off the table in a divorce, from the property and debt division to spousal maintenance and the payment of attorney fees in a divorce. So it can definitely simplify things, and I think that just really the taboo sort of part about prenuptial agreements is kind of evaporated. I mean, back in the day, it was almost kind of scandalous to get a prenuptial agreement. As you say, people thought, oh, we're forecasting this isn't going to work. But I think as a society, we've kind of progressed and understand that, no, this is just simplifying things in the instance it doesn't work, but it doesn't mean that it can't or it won't.
Kurt, I might be asked to return my girl card for the question that I'm about to ask you. But it almost seems like having a prenup, in addition to all of the great points you just made, I could see where not having a prenup would create tension in a marriage that might be impacted, by that lack of a document. And therefore, you're sort of throwing some chaos into a situation that doesn't need to necessarily be made chaotic.
No, that's totally true. I mean, historically, when people would get married, you would, and again, a lot of people still do this, and there's nothing wrong with it. But you combine all your bank accounts, and you combine all your assets, and I mean, that's what people did. Now more and more folks are, not doing that. They're keeping separate bank accounts, and they have a prenuptial agreement, and they're not combining everything. And in a way, this can help some parties, because in a lot of marriages, you have a saver and you have a spender. And when you have that conflict in the marriage, it can create big problems, particularly when the accounts are combined, because the saver is mad that the spender's spending, and maybe the spender's mad that the saver is so conservative with their money and finances, and they're not living life because they're always saving for some sort of future retirement. So having a prenup and separating those assets versus combining can help, and can particularly help when people have different philosophies on money.
So you've been talking about the benefits. What are some of the limits of having a prenup?
Well, you can't deal with custody of the kids, so that issue can't be dealt with in a prenuptial agreement, and you can't deal with child support and money issues involving the kids. Of course, a lot of people at the time they get married, they don't have kids together, so you would be looking into the future and assuming there's going to be kids, and then trying to put in a contract what would take place. So that's not possible. You can't put anything involving the kids or child support in the prenup. But again, you can take any property and debt division issues off the table. You can take the issue of spousal maintenance, which some states still refer to as alimony, and then the payment of attorney fees. In a divorce, one party's asking the other party to pay their fees or whatnot. You can take that issue off the table. So you're just leaving the kids and child support in play, and everything else essentially is resolved if the prenup is done right.
I think this is an interesting question that just came in on the Royal Banks of Missouri text line. Love hearing from all of you, 84126. Can the same lawyer create a prenup for both parties?
No, you can't do that. I mean, both parties have to have independent counsel. That's a requirement in a prenuptial agreement. So, lawyers in different firms have to represent both parties. And I know, a lot of individuals are sort of adverse to that out of the gates, but for it to be enforceable, you got to have independent counsel. Both parties have to get independent advice, and that is definitely a requirement. So don't use one lawyer and try to have a prenup put together. In those kinds of cases, and one party can challenge it and try to have the prenup tossed.
This is from the 618. Another great question. What if a young couple would like a prenup, but they can't afford the attorney fees? They want to have it before they get married. What are there any sort of allowances made for that kind of thing?
It's tough. It's one of those things where, again, ultimately both parties do need to have a lawyer to have a prenup agreement be enforceable. Obviously, there's forms and stuff like that people can try to print off on the internet and try to do these things on their own. The problem with it, though, is just the enforceability issue. In a divorce, if there's a prenup, you have to disclose whether there is one or not. And I was just reading, interestingly, the Ben Affleck, J-Lo divorce. Apparently, they don't have a prenup, and the media could sense that just from the pleadings in the case. But if you have a prenup, then you're going to have to seek to have it enforced. In courts, there's different requirements for prenup, but one of them is that each party has independent counsel. And there's other requirements as well, but each side having a lawyer is a key. And again, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but it does save money on the back end.
Yeah, I was going to say that's sometimes people get a little spooked about just like, the attorney fees, but something like this that's fixed, it's not going to require, a lot of discovery or anything like that. I can imagine that it might be more affordable than people presume.
For sure, especially if there's not a lot of assets, too. And it's not a complicated prenup to draft.
We hate to throw you a curveball on International Doggy Day, but Jill and I were talking about this in the last hour. Dog custody cases, Kurt Stange. Do you have to deal with some of these, during the year, or are these becoming more commonplace?
It is. Parties really do get attached to the pets, and that can be a big issue in some divorces for sure. And so that can really complicate it. Of course, some states have kind of changed and evolved this, but in most instances, pets are treated as property, and so the settlement documents indicate who's getting what pet, because most parties have a tough enough time exchanging kids back and forth.
Right.
During custody periods. Can you imagine? You got to show up to the other parent's house with the kids and the pets and hand them off. That makes it even messier.
Yeah. Well, and this is why we're so grateful to you for sharing your expertise and for coming on. We appreciate it. Kurt Stange, don't forget the E on the end, Stange, StangeLawFirm.com. Kurt, have a great day and happy Labor Day early to you.
Fun information.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
He does such a good job of explaining complicated stuff in a way that the rest of us can digest as well.